It was just over 50 years ago that traveling evangelist Lewis Kaplan heard a call from the Lord. He was to give up his work holding revival meetings and begin a worldwide ministry on the radio, sharing the good news with the Jewish people about their Messiah, Yeshua. During that important year of 1967, the first Jewish Voice Broadcasts radio program was broadcast on KHEP Christian Radio in Phoenix. 4 months later, on June 5, 1967, war erupted in Israel. In just 6 days, the war was over. Israel had won, and pivotal prophecy was fulfilled. The Jewish people controlled Jerusalem for the first time in 2,000 years. From its inception, the mission of Jewish Voice has been intimately entwined with Israel and the Jewish people. In many ways, the Jewish Voice story is really Israel's story, and ultimately, God's story. The next year, the network grew to 22 stations. And in 1969, Jewish Voice broadcasts expanded to become international. Lewis Kaplan began the decade of the 1970s by traveling to Israel to preach and share his dream of broadcasting there. A woman named Kira was in the audience and became fascinated by his mission. Within a year, Lewis and Kira married, and she joined the ministry. One of her first contributions was to begin the Jewish Voice broadcast newsletter. By 1972, Jewish Voice broadcasts were heard weekly on 43 radio stations. That same year, the ministry sent its first witnessing teams to the streets of Israel. In 1974, Elliot Clayman, a Messianic Jewish attorney, taught Jewish Voice broadcasts' first Bible school classes in Carmel, Haifa, in Israel. Jewish Voice Broadcasts celebrated its 10-year anniversary by opening the JVB Center in Phoenix in 1978. The ministry also began production of the first Messianic Jewish satellite television program in the world. The pilot TV program aired that fall on CBN, PTL, and TBN, and it originated in the Kaplan living room. The new JVB Center was finished early in 1979. The Phoenix Messianic Fellowship was founded that year and began regularly meeting at the JVB Center. The next year, across the country, in Buffalo, New York, a 20-year-old Jewish college student named Jonathan Bernis accepted Yeshua as his Messiah. In 1982, the Phoenix Messianic Fellowship became a congregation in Arizona, while 2 years later, 24-year-old Jonathan Bernis founded Congregation Shema Yisrael in his hometown of Rochester, New York. The 24-year-old Messianic rabbi was to serve the congregation for nearly a decade. Meanwhile, in 1985, yours truly became the new host of JVB's television program called L'Chaim.
Jewish Voice Broadcasts present L'Chaim, meaning to life, proclaiming the life of the Messiah.
In 1990, Rabbi Jonathan Bernis embarked on his first trip to the Soviet Union. He went specifically to visit refuseniks, who were Soviet Jews being persecuted for observing Jewish tradition. His destinations were Moscow and St. Petersburg, and he traveled with 5 representatives from the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America. They were armed with 300 Bibles, 400 pieces of Messianic literature, and a list of 5 refuseniks. In 6 days, everything they brought with them had been distributed. Jonathan was deeply impacted and returned several times to share his faith. It was on an airplane flying home from his 3rd trip that the Lord spoke to him, calling him to return once again to reach my people. There were 3 million Jewish people in the former Soviet Union at that time, and Rabbi Bernis could only think of 2 individuals who were trying to reach them with the gospel. The next year, in May of 1993, Jonathan Bernis conducted the first International Festival of Jewish Music and Dance in St. Petersburg, Russia. It was a tremendous success, with more than 14,000 attending and 3,600 Jewish people coming forward in altar calls and filling out follow-up cards. That fall, at the age of 33, Jonathan resigned as Rabbi Shema Yisrael and started Hear, O Israel Ministries. He moved to St. Petersburg and founded the Messianic Jewish Center there and more than 300 attending weekly services. Over the next 12 months, festivals were launched in Minsk, Belarus, Kiev, Ukraine, and in Moscow. New Messianic Jewish congregations were formed in all three cities. In fact, the congregation founded in Kiev is now the largest in the world with nearly 2,000 members. The following year, 1995, Hero Israel festivals began to fill football stadiums.
Only stand if you want to pray this prayer with me.
The next year, Kira Kaplan traveled to Kishinev, Moldova, to document the Hero Israel Festival. More quietly, she met with Jonathan Bernis to discuss the possibility that he might be Louis Kaplan's successor upon Kaplan's retirement. Jonathan's reply was a swift, "Thanks, but I'm not interested." And with that, the third decade of Jewish Voice broadcasts came to a close. Decade 4 began with formation of the Messianic Jewish Bible Institute to train leaders for the Jewish harvest in partnership with God's Grace and Tikkun International and Shady Grove Church in Dallas. Dr. Wayne Wilkes and his wife Bonnie served faithfully as the first international director for 20 years. In August of 1997, the Kaplans were in Finland, en route to meet Jonathan Bernis to participate in a Hero Israel Ministries Festival when Louis Kaplan suffered a devastating stroke. He spent 3 weeks in a hospital in Finland. In May of 1998, Israel turned 50 years old, and the next month, Jonathan was again asked to lead Jewish Voice broadcasts, this time with a better reception. He eventually agreed and was elected the executive director of Jewish Voice broadcasts. A year later, May 19, 1999, Louis Kaplan went to be with the Lord. In October, Hero Israel Ministries broke ground with a new kind of event, held in Gondar, Ethiopia. It was still called a festival, but it included a medical team of 4 doctors who would minister to the great physical needs of the people in attendance. This event planted the seed for the massive medical outreaches that would follow in the new millennium. In 2003, Kira Kaplan and several other board members attended a very important event as Jonathan Bernis married Elise Angela Carneo in Cariba, Brazil. A year later, on January 30th, 2004, Kira Kaplan passed away. The next March, Jonathan spent most of the month in Ethiopia accompanied by 70 healthcare professionals for a concentrated medical outreach to the Beta Abraham and Beta Israel Jewish communities in Addis Ababa and Gondar. They served 7,512 patients, distributed 3,400 pairs of eyeglasses, and 2 specialist surgeons performed 50 eye surgeries. Also in March of 2006, JVMI opened and registered Jewish Voice Ministries Canada with the assistance of Rabbi Jeff Foreman, leader of City of David congregation in Toronto. Jewish Voice United Kingdom followed 2 years later with the opening of an office in London led by Jonathan's longtime friend, Dr. Ruth Fleischer. The 40th anniversary of Jewish Voice found the ministry growing even faster. Important initiatives for the 5th decade included the new Media Center, medical outreach clinics, leadership training initiatives including the Messianic Jewish Roundtable. The ministry also began working to assist hundreds of Jewish believers in Israel who are in need through the partner ministries there. In 2011, Chosen Books released Jonathan's first full-length book, A Rabbi Looks at Jesus of Nazareth. Each year of the decade brought important new events. In 2012, the first outreach to the Limba took place in Buringa, Zimbabwe. Also that year, Jonathan announced that a television special, The Miracle of Israel, would soon launch in 6 to 8 major cities with significant Jewish populations. There have been numerous medical outreaches each year, and as of 2017, as JVMI celebrates its 50th year, 86 Messianic congregations have been planted in Zimbabwe, with 18 planted in Ethiopia. Many important milestones have been achieved this year. Among them, Jewish Voice treated its 400,000th medical outreach patient, welcomed its 1 millionth outreach participant, and perhaps most notably, the ministry opened its first office in Israel. Just as the beginnings of Jewish Voice were inextricably tied to the historic and prophetic event of the land of Israel reclaiming Jerusalem, standing with Israel and introducing the Jewish people to their Messiah Yeshua, continues to be the center of this ministry. God has been good during these incredible first 50 years, and we look forward to what God has planned for the future until Yeshua returns.